Thanks for coming. We have a very exciting panel now. The panel title is Scouting for Winners is the next Facebook the way of the future. We decided as panelists, as moderator, we're going to take it a bit differently, add some spice to it, and talk also about different kinds of winners. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome my panelists to come on stage. We have Tom Speechley, the CEO of Orius Capital. We have Maher Kaddoura, the Managing Director of Next Move. Farrukh Khan, Director of Acumen Fund in Pakistan. Badr Jafar, Managing Director of Crescent Petroleum, Crescent Group, and Abdullatif, founder of Alsayegh Media. Just to put it into perspective, in the US, every month there's a $1 billion company born. I was looking at the stats just this morning, and one of the famous angel investors, Ron Conway, said in 2002 that there was $1 billion every 3 months. But if you look at the stats for the past year, we now have a $1 billion company every 2 months. So hopefully we'll start seeing that soon in the region. But in the meantime, I think there are some challenges and some opportunities that we need to look at aggressively before we get there. So, Tom, I'm going to start with you. So, usually as an investor, you want to invest in winners before they emerge as clear winners. You want to find them before everyone else finds them. As an investor, how do you identify them and how you find them and nurture them to become winners early on?
Okay, so I think it's important at the outset to stress that we're actually not investors, we're fund managers. That's a fundamental difference. We don't look for outright winners. We're not out there looking for Facebook, actually. Some of my colleagues on the panel are out there looking for Facebooks, but what we're not doing is looking for the one investment that will make or break a particular strategy. We're looking for a portfolio. And that means we have a very different approach. So we're looking for, we typically take a top-down and bottom-up approach to life. So we look at a market, it may be somewhere in Africa, and we work out what works well in that country. Would Facebook make sense in Angola as an investment? Probably not. Why? Because people on the internet in Angola are already on Facebook, so it doesn't make sense. So we're looking for sectors where there's typically a supply-demand gap. We also take a bottom-up approach, which is, what is the team that can actually exploit that gap? So we find specific companies, we look at specific companies, we spend a boring amount of time, months and months and months, getting to know the teams to work out whether they can exploit the opportunity. And I think for the investor in the audience, those people who are looking for the Facebook, the one thing you have to bear in mind is there's an absolute correlation between return and risk. It's a completely symbiotic relationship. By definition, if you're looking for a Facebook, you are taking on a lot of risk as an investor. So expect to lose a lot of money looking for that investment. It's by definition a risk-return relationship.
So Tom, how much do you focus on the teams versus the sectors? You invest in a bit later stage companies, and in that particular stage, how much is the team versus the industry versus the sector more important for you?
I think a truism would be the earlier the stage of the company, the more important the team is, because if by definition, once you get to a later stage corporate, you can have a management team parachuted in to run the business. So the earlier the stage, the more important the team is.
And so, if you were to characterize what is common between all the great teams that you have invested in, or great sectors maybe, so how can we break it down its fundamentals? Maybe let's start with the teams. As great entrepreneurs, what do you see being common between them?
Integrity is probably the one defining feature of successful entrepreneurs, because they have to have relationships with everybody from suppliers to investors, and those relationships need to be transparent, open, clean, honest. So all of them have great integrity, but also obviously focus, energy, drive, and also experience. There's also a myth, I think, that because Mark Zuckerberg was young when he founded Facebook, that the right team is a young team. By and large, I don't agree with that. I think the more experienced the team, the more likely to be successful it is. You know, and it comes back to, what are your life experiences? Have you ever started a company before? Has your company ever got into difficulties? Have you ever raised finance before? What do you know about suppliers, logistics, supply chains? And that comes with experience.
Have you ever invested in a failed entrepreneur who failed in the past? Is that something that you put a high value on or low value on?
Good question. We probably have, but it's not something we look for specifically. We're not looking for people who fail, but failure is a life experience. So sometimes that can be beneficial. It may, on the other hand, mean they're incompetent.
Farrukh, so we're talking about, Tom is talking about investing in companies and trying to find winners. And I think in Acumen Fund, you have an interesting model of nurturing winners and bringing them into your circle with the Acumen Fellow program. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, tell us more about it.
Sure. Thank you, Habib. Is this, yeah. You know, in terms of the Acumen Fellows program, both at the global level as well as at the regional level, and we recently launched the Fellows program in Pakistan. Yes, the idea is to build an ecosystem, but it's for both to develop an alternative leadership, because as you know, Acumen is an impact investment fund. It has its investment side and it has its leadership development side. And the Fellows program, we hope, will build up an ecosystem over the years where many of these fellows will set up social enterprises in which we could invest in, as well as go on and do other things. So it's not really confined to just developing entrepreneurs for our own investment. That we hope will be a side sort of result of that, and we're already seeing that happening. So there are a number of fellows who have gone on and founded companies in which Acumen has invested. But really the idea is to develop an alternative leadership that we feel is really needed in the world we live in today.
And for the sake of the crowd, can you tell us a bit more about Acumen Fund?
Yeah, Acumen Fund is the leading social impact fund. Its focus is to really change the way the world tackles poverty. So we invest in companies that have to be commercially sustainable, but must have a social impact, as well as their goods and services must be focused towards the poorer segments of society, what is now called the base of the pyramid. So really, in a sense, Acumen has helped develop this whole industry now. Patient capital, social impact investing, BOP, these are all buzzwords right now. JP Morgan, in a report recently, said that about $4 billion were flowing into this in 2012. And in the coming decade, they said over $1 trillion will flow in. I believe these are widely exaggerated or there's a problem of definition. But we really focus on companies that are doing goods and services for the base of the pyramid.
So when you invest in the fellow programs and the fellows, how do you measure your investment? How do you measure your returns?
There isn't a measurement of return in the fellows program. I mean, just to give you an example, for the 10 global fellows this year, we got about 1,100 applications from all over the world. For the 20 fellowships in Pakistan, we got about 600 applications. And there isn't any measurement of return for those fellowship programs. The measurement of return really comes on our investing side, where at a minimum we would expect our capital back with some return, because we believe that the sustainability of a business is best measured by their ability to pay back the capital, whether debt or equity. But these businesses are very difficult, and there is this sort of sense developing in the financial world that you can get normalized financial returns as well as do social impact investing. And in our experience, that's not really possible. And if anybody interested here, I'd urge you to go and read a report that we did earlier this year with the Monitor group called From Blueprint to Scale.
I'm surprised about this statement. Can you tell us more about, I mean, how isn't social returns, how can't you do this, both at the same time?
Well, no, Habib, I guess it depends on your definition, because any investment will have a social impact, right? It'll create employment, it'll be income generating if it's successful, etc. But you know, the way we look at social impact is are businesses that are focused on the BOP segment, businesses that are you know, at a stage where they cannot attract normal commercial capital. And it will take them many years to be able to scale up to a level where they can attract normal commercial capital, either debt or equity. And as you know, as an investor, the longer the time scale, it directly impacts your returns. And these companies at many times have to innovate. So it's not just a question of the markets that they're operating in. If you look at an example of Husk Power, that set up Husk Power units in Bihar in India. And you know, it wasn't just setting up the power plant. They had to set up the infrastructure. So on bamboos, you know, lay out the wires to provide electricity to the villages, to creating the other infrastructure, to creating a Husk University to train the people who would be available. You know, so it's not just the markets have to be developed. The consumer has to understand that this is something new that's coming to them, because many of the people at the BOP will not have had these goods and services before. For example, you know, large parts of Bihar or large parts in Chitral, where we've invested in micro-hydel projects in Pakistan, essentially those areas had been written off as being off-grid for God knows how many decades to come.
I mean, I'd like Badr to comment on that, because Badr, in your company, you've operated in northern Iraq, and one of the things you've done there is to embed social impact within the DNA of your business model. And I think your experience is a bit different from what Farrukh is talking about. Can you shed light on that, please?
Sure, no, thank you. I mean, I'd just like to say, as a general statement, that I think we have a huge opportunity today in the Arab world to really infuse this philosophy of social enterprise into our businesses. Now, the SME sector in any developed economy in the world, actually in most developed economies of the world, makes up about 70% of the whole you know, economy. Now, in the Arab world, the average is still 15%. We also know, of course, that the SME space is responsible for employing about 70% of the global workforce. And so with the impending crisis we have in the Arab world related to job creation, having to create 100 million jobs over the next 20 years, which is more than we created in the last century, I think an opportunity to engage the SME space through social enterprise to deal with some of the biggest social problems we have going forward, I think is a huge opportunity. I know everybody on this panel is doing it in some shape or form, and I'm sure many of the audience. Now, I disagree with my friend Farrukh in that it's not possible to do both. I understand that there are different ways to define social enterprise, but the way I do is really reorganizing our marketplace of ideas and egos in order to reconcile our interests with our responsibilities. So it's really repackaging capitalism. It's creative capitalism. It's looking at our businesses and defining them as being successful not because of their financial gain or profit, but also for their social impact, as well as, where possible, environmental impact. So it's really the triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps, profit, planet, and people. And every industry, bar none, has an opportunity to do this. There are some excellent examples of prominent industries, especially in the financial sector, with microfinance, etc. does. But I think every industry does. Now, one of my businesses under the Crescent Group is Crescent Petroleum. not many people would associate the petroleum business as being a socially responsible business. But one example you mentioned now is a project which we have in the northern Iraq, in the Kurdistan region, where the objective was really to produce gas for power generation. Now, for people who don't know the region, there's about 5 million Iraqis living there who had virtually no access to power or services because they were neglected during the Saddam Hussein era. So the way in which we modeled the entry into the territory was to really prioritize gas for power generation. Now, the region was, in 2007, when we entered, had very little financial capacity to actually pay for that. So we actually created the first 300 million cubic feet of gas, the first chunk of gas production for free to the region, on the basis that we would recover that longer term through liquid sales, as well as the gas which the region would then be able to afford once it was moving, once the machine was moving, and once there was other investments being made and creation of industry. Now, what that shows you is sometimes you do need to look at a longer term horizon for your investment, no doubt. But if your business models really satisfies the base of the economic pyramid, then you'll find that your business models end up being a lot more sustainable, scalable, and robust to short-term fluctuations, be it political fluctuations, economic fluctuations. And this example, as a result, led to not only 4 million people getting electricity in 1 year, 24-hour electricity, but also saving the government $3 billion a year in money that they would need to spend in subsidies towards diesel to subsidize as a result of lack of gas. So every industry has a potential, and we have many industries, I think, in the Arab world today which are not being structured or used with that mindset.
So Farrukh, maybe as a comment on that as well, in your investments, you look at an outlook of 8 to 20 years, I think, of an exit. I mean, you also have a longer term outlook. Now that you've heard the example from Badr, do you think it's just a different packaging, or just looking at things differently that would balance between the social and financial returns?
No, I agree with Badr, and I, as I said, it depends on how you define it. In the end, every investment will have a social impact. It'll create employment. It'll provide goods and services to people. What I was talking about, as we define social impact investing, is really goods and services focused on the base of the pyramid. And to take as an example that you gave, microfinance, which is now a valid sort of form of financial services in the whole spectrum of financial services industry. But if you go back to the early to mid 90s, when microfinance was starting up, there was no commercial capital willing to back it up. It was primarily backed by grants. It was primarily backed by philanthropic capital that then allowed it to grow to a level where it is today, where it is standing on its own feet and can attract commercial capital, both debt as well as equity. And that's what I was, I guess, talking about. So, there are different spectrums, but really the need is there, what we call the pioneer gap. When these goods and services focused on the BOP are starting up, there is very little capital that's going in at that stage, because most people want to come in at the late stage. In Africa, for example, we looked at, out of 84 funds, only 6 would even look at really early stage investment. So once the company is scaled up, once the model has been made commercially feasible, then Acumen's role is finished. So for example, we invested in microfinance industry in Pakistan in the early days, and now Finca, which is one of the largest global microfinance institutions, is coming in and buying us out and taking over the company. And that's great, because they're going to transform the way microfinance is done in Pakistan.
So Maher, from what I hear from Farrukh and from Badr, that there needs to be a marriage between sound business models and social entrepreneurship. in your experience, how do you think we can balance financial and social returns? It's a conspiracy.
Hello. First of all, guys, thank you for showing up. I know it's after lunch. We have to be special forces, trained by special forces to keep you awake. So thank you for showing up. The second issue in this space is, I have a saying, I say, how can you wake up somebody pretending to sleep? And this is the difficulty in this balancing these double measurement of the nature of people that they want to invest, they want to get maximum return, and some of the excess, the surplus, we can put it into good work. The world now, especially in the Arab world, I believe we cannot afford to stay with this model, and we need to have some kind of balance. That the challenge is how can we create measurement. I know there are lots of measurement on the financial side, but people who are interested in the social side, what we call impact investing, where we want to balance, it's very important to start putting some innovation and creativity and discipline into coming up with these measures. On the smaller side, I want to give an example. Like, if you come in and you want to create job opportunities and you have a fund and you want to create it among the poor, it's a good idea to come in and have partnership between people who are not willing to, they do not want to have higher return on their investment, so they accept lower return on that social side. And the other side, people who are willing, they want that higher impact. So we can create a new product to finance what we call micro ventures in smaller, poorer areas. Not only microfinance by lending people. This is what I'm saying. We need to be creative and innovative in coming up with new instruments, a new asset class for this social, the impact investing. And this is what, I know it's difficult to develop the measures. There's only one, can you guys sing?
No, I was going to ask you a simple question. So how do we do that? I mean, practically.
I tell you, I want to come down to earth and work on the smaller scale. Example, what Fadi is doing right now is he's creating in Jordan, and we are moving, following him, is to create micro venture fund where we go into a specific town and we invest in people who have ideas, even a barber shop, a bicycle shop, anything, to invest in them as investors micro venture, where we bring in know-how and expertise and mentoring with money. Some of us, we accept lower return, and some of us expect higher return. But at the end of the day, we have a new instrument called micro venture product, a new asset class that we want to promote, at least starting in Jordan and moving across the Arab world. Maybe Fadi can comment on this as well.
And I think everyone is here tomorrow should come watch Fadi's talk, because he's announcing something interesting tomorrow with a very cool name that he came up while swimming. Can I say that? Talking about promotion, you want to comment on this, Fadi? Talking about promoting, Abdullatif, I want to ask you about the role of the press here. The role of, you are working in media, you have started radio stations, TV stations, and now you're in social media. Where do you think the responsibility of media lies in here, in creating winners and shedding the light on them?
Well, I think being the only Emirati on the panel, Habib, if you allow me, I'll break the norm.
Badr is next to you.
Or in Kaddoura,
Yeah.
okay. Let me give you basically a complete new angle, and this is something we witness almost every day by being in the field. Now, what's happening as a result of, and since this session was very much driven by media and social media and all the new tools which is being used by the startups, what's happening is not only technology what we need to start focusing on, but also individuals who are being a result or a product out of this technology. Very quick example here. 5 years back, you go and you sit with a client, he tells you this is the media plan, and he starts listing the mediums. Now you go and you sit with the same client, he starts mentioning individuals' name. So this will take me again to a different angle, probably, or a space which no one has thought about before. Investing in individuals. And I'll tell you what's going to happen next, and probably if you allow me just to take a minute, to give you my own futuristic approach on how this is going to happen. People are being very empowered right now, so there is a media shift or a power shift moving from the medium to individuals. So individuals are becoming the new icons of media. What that means, individual, and this is something that started happening in the West right now. People started selling their tweets, people started selling their personalities, people started selling their, so you have something which basically wasn't measured, it did not exist in the past, and suddenly we can start seeing happening. Within our social life, now families started thinking in a complete different approach or different way. How can I raise my kids today so they can become that medium, standalone medium? Because I know it's not where he's going to work. It's not basically the job he can get in the future, but it's him right now. So I think this is a new opportunity. It's a different horizon. Probably we see it every day. I think it's going to grow very fast within the next few years. Probably this will leave you with 2 headlines. We had an Emirati who made sense on the panel, or we had a crazy Emirati who basically, didn't know what he was talking about. Yeah.
So are you saying that also with the power shift happening, that we're going to see potentially even more winners in the society, from a different kind of winners as well in here?
Well, absolutely. I think it's happening almost every day. It's just that the calculation of media and the power of media, the penetration of, a quick example here again, Habib. 60% of people in the UAE today, they carry smartphone. What does that mean by definition? It means they are a moving, worldwide centric media that can do anything. And coming from that background, when I used to run newspapers, what would a reporter do? He'll go outside, he'll collect a couple of news, bring it back, and then we'll have it in the editorial session and decide what's going to be the headline next day. Now that doesn't exist anymore. It's basically something which is being beaten by all the individuals who have smartphones. But now people will start thinking about how they can empower their ability, how they can have more skills, how they can be more talented, because at the end of the day, there is a big question, do I need to use another medium when I can become a medium myself?
So can we say that we should expect to see a new generation of winners, something that's completely different from what we've been used to?
Absolutely. There is a complete shift that's going to start happening. We are at the very beginning of this shift, but I would say 3 to 5 years from now, that level of maturity where money start being spent there is going to start happening.
So, but Twitter itself became a winner thanks to the media. It's because the CNNs of this world, you overused it. And what I'm trying to ask you is, as a media person in the Emirates, do you find it a responsibility on yourself to also try to promote emerging winners that are in your community? And if so, how do you do that? Or how do you encourage the other media to actually do that?
Well, basically, if you are talking here about the finding of new icons, are you referring to this, or
Yes.
you're referring to basically stretching the opportunities here?
No, I'm talking about identifying winners in your community.
Sure.
And where the media can play a big role in accelerating those to become real winners.
Well, you see,
the responsibility of media more than the role.
I think we have to start redefining media. And I think this is going to be a big challenge for everyone. You know, going to a lot of conferences around the world, you can see everyone is talking about solutions. I just came back from EFRA and Frankfurt, people are talking about solutions. You go to MEPCOM, people are talking about solutions. You go to NAB, people are talking about solutions. So you can see that traditional media right now, they are trying to find their positions. I'm not saying it's going to die, still going to be there, hopefully for the next few years. But what I'm saying is, you're going to be less dependent now on this form of media versus basically all the new mediums, which is allowing individuals now to talk to New York, London, Paris, Frankfurt, wherever you want, and convey whatever messages you want. So it's also, it shows,
Yeah, I mean, this is actually how I got to meet Fadi. I remember I emailed them on LinkedIn 5-6 years ago.
I'm recruiting
is how
in
we
Jordan next week. I
Right.
have 35 people. They all came through LinkedIn. And I used to spend probably hundreds of thousands for recruitment agencies to start sourcing this talent.
So Abdullatif,
It's-
let me ask you another question. You've built, again, radio station and a few social media companies, and I've listened to one of your talks on YouTube, again, one of the new medias, and you talked about how fast you were able to build those. Tell me a bit about the speed and the need for speed in the new generation of winners.
Well, I think, you know, we started moving from keyboards now to stretching and using the two fingers, and we can see how kids are playing with these new devices. Speed is going to be something I think is going to leave a lot of players behind, a lot of individuals behind as well. We are talking about real time. Crisis management with a new definition is completely a different ball game. I think as a result of this, you're going to start seeing a lot of companies going to be out of business very soon. We started seeing this. I think the educational institute, they have to play a big role here. And I always have an argument that academic, unfortunately, they should not start teaching our kids the new medium. You know, every 6 months, you need an update. Otherwise, you are out of, and forgive me, I have to be very transparent here. Every 6 months, you need to update the curriculum. Otherwise, it's not valid. It's a waste of time. You're not gonna, I meet new kids graduating from universities every day. They can't do the job we require today. You know, whatever happened over the past 4 years, not everything, but most of it was a waste of time. So there is a huge shift even in the way we think about everything that contributes to this new way of thinking about media.
Right. Tom, we're talking about speed. How important is speed for investors in identifying and supporting winners?
To be perfectly honest, I think the world is reinventing itself every maybe 5 years these days. So I completely agree with the comments. Either keep up with it or you're going to get lost behind. But for us, we look at a time horizon of 4 years to build a successful company and then exit from it. But just stepping back, I mean, I think technology and Facebook is part of the solution globally. Is it part of the solution regionally for this part of the world? And a lot of time is spent focusing on technology and startups in this part of the world, when in my view, a lot more time could be spent on much more boring businesses that produce plastic, containers or rubber gloves, etc. You know, the big challenge at the moment, and it's been alluded to by Badr, is we have to create 50, 100 million jobs in this part of the world, literally for unemployment not to get worse. And I can tell you, we are not creating anywhere near that number of jobs at the moment. We're focusing too much on startups, which aren't creating jobs, because the issue is not starting a business, it's making a successful business. You haven't done anything by starting a business. You need to scale it up. You need to be employing thousands of people. What type of businesses will create thousands of jobs, millions of jobs in this part of the world? They're very boring ones. They produce food. They manufacture things and they sell them, and I think that's where we should be spending a lot of our time.
So from your experience, how can startup become scale-ups? What has to come in between? Is it the investor, the private sector? I mean, what are some of the things that, as people in this room are starting their companies, should look at to partner with or to work on to become scale-ups?
Yeah. So if you're a small or medium-sized company or a startup in this part of the world, you face three main challenges. One is access to capital. Is there a bank that will lend you money? or is there an investor that'll invest in your company? You know, and McKinsey and the IFC reckon that the funding gap in this part of the world, the scale of the issue, if you like, is $140 billion. I can tell you that there are millions of dollars going into this space, but they're not billions, and they're not 140 billion. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is access to best practice. Have you got the skill set required to scale a business? And often a business that's started, it may reach a certain level of revenue, $5 million. That may be successful, but you need to get that business to $50 million. And the skills you need to build a business or take it from 5 million of revenue to 50 million of revenue is a completely different skill set. But the main overlying challenge, I think, that really sort of is the one issue that we really face in this part of the world is that we don't have access to a global market. In theory, if you look at all the largest economies in the world, the US, the EU, Japan, China, now Brazil, Russia, etc., they have got massive domestic economies, 100 million people, 200 million people, consumers. In this part of the world, the Arab consumer is notionally 350 million people. But when you're building a business in this part of the world, you find very quickly that you come across a border around your country. And that border has been put up to stop people basically coming in and out of countries. And it's also stopping the movement of trade, goods, people, ideas. And that is the real issue. We need to bring down the borders, customs union, so that it's cheaper for me to buy something from Saudi Arabia than it is to ship it in from Amazon in the US.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the example of Amazon, which is technology more or less. I mean, offline empowered by technology. So don't you think that technology can have a big role here in allowing scalability beyond borders? Or do you think there's...
No, because if I want a book or a pair of sneakers, somebody has to go and fetch it from wherever it's been produced and bring it into the country, and they need to be able to do that extremely efficiently.
Okay. So in terms of technology, in terms of actually another question for you, Maher. So how important, and you've talked about that in the past, how important is failure for you to become a winner? Is it, we talked a bit with Tom about that, but what's your view as well on it in terms of getting to this winning position? Is it from beginning to the end?
I mean, I just want to give a comment. Do you know, it's an opportunity in this conference is to reclaim entrepreneurship back, because I have a feeling that it is running away into sexy landscape, sexy space, where we only think of it that it is in the digital space, that everything we want to do is maybe an American firm will come and buy us. We need to have real solutions to our own markets, regional markets. And it can be boring. I have recently invested in something, a mobile bidet. You know, a real issue for Muslims is to wash after you go to the toilet for us, you know. So I invested in a mobile bidet. It is a real solution, you know, that will have mass appeal, mass market. We want to go down and find real solutions, not to be sitting in a space where we are only dreaming. Dreaming is good, so this is one thing. The other thing I want to say this to entrepreneurs in general and mainly startups, it's not only about making a salary and increasing the valuation of your company. It's about delivering on your dream. This is the core, and what I'm facing with lots of startup entrepreneurs, their only focus is how he's going to secure his salary and how he's going to increase the value of his company, and he's forgetting about delivering on the promise.
And for many, they think they're winning when they get a round of funding, which is only the beginning of the real work.
They live one round to the other round. And this is the issue, the challenge, that they have lost focus of the dream. So let me go back to the issue of failure. My own personal, الفشل صاحبي, I befriend failure. I'm not afraid of it, because I always say that example. When we were kids, in order to walk, we failed so many times. If the first time we failed and we fell and we stopped trying, we would not have been here walking. So the idea, the same thing, I look at it, you need to fail and you need to expect to fail. The issue is, what do you do after failure? And the real failure, I'm sounding like a poet here, you know, it's to stop trying. This is the real failure. And please, I want the organizers of this conference is really to address this issue of reclaiming entrepreneurship back. I know Abraaj, they launched Celebration of Entrepreneurship 3 years ago, and we were afraid something like this will happen. And sorry, Fadi, it happened. It ran away from us, and I think we need to reclaim it back down to earth.
In the meantime, you can start thinking about the questions. We're going to go back to the floor in a couple of minutes.
But I think first you need to congratulate him.
I'm going to comment on this as well. And Maher, I can tell you
woke up everyone with the B-Day story.
Before you move, I'm just going to tell you, Maher, that we are trying to work hard in the ecosystem to reclaiming entrepreneurship as Wamda, and we need to work hand in hand, I think, everyone. It requires everyone to work together to get to that mission. Go ahead, Farrukh.
Then I was just congratulating him that he woke up everyone. What is his objective with the B-Day story?
Badr, I want to ask you, so we're talking about reclaiming entrepreneurship, we're talking about solving local problems, while locally we have trademark, but one thing is, the Arab world today is passing through a recession. It could be, look at the social recession or economic recession, but we are at a hard times. And it has been widely acknowledged in the US, for example, that at times of recession is where winners emerge, winners can start working on them. Do you think we can draw an analogy here, and do you think the youth of the Arab world should be empowered and feel encouraged to create the next winners of tomorrow?
Look, I mean, at times of what Warren Buffett called irrational exuberance, it's always difficult with the excitement and the adrenaline momentum that's going on to try and figure out what might be wrong, because everything seems to be going right. So a time of reflection is usually when things aren't going so well. We've obviously passed through some difficult years, potentially difficult years to come as well. I think there is huge opportunity to relook at some of what's going on now. I want to bring up the example and the importance of good corporate governance. This is something which is critical. Today, in the Arab world and in the world altogether, you know, the black box model of businesses with information going one way simply is not sustainable and doesn't work. What also we know is even in the most developed economies, rules alone will not mandate, you know, will not lead to the right practices. As we've seen, some of the biggest failures in some of the most developed economies in the world in recent years came from bad governance within systems and legal systems which were actually very good. So what I think it's critically important to do is to, as the private sector, you know, not try and, you know, is to realize that the private sector is primarily motivated by incentive. So what's critically important as we recover from a recession is to realize the value gains and the incentive behind adopting good governance practices. What I mean by good governance, I mean, of course, transparency, accountability, anti-corruption, and this is absolutely critical. An initiative which I launched 3 years ago in partnership with the United Nations Office of Partnerships is called the Pearl Initiative. And that's exactly that. It's a private sector initiative for the private sector, by the private sector, working with business leaders, men and women across the Arab world, to realize and identify the value gains in adopting these models. If we don't do that, it's not going to happen. You know, people will pay lip service to it, and as soon as there's you know, an incentive in another direction, it's followed. And time again, you've proven this. So I do think there are huge opportunities to relook at, like I said before, not just the fabric of our business models, but the way in which we see the whole ecosystem of doing business in the region. And I think corporate governance and everything that that entails is something critical if we really are going to be part of a global environment with access to global markets and, of course, interest from the international investor community as well.
So the private sector has to reinvent itself, more or less, in some ways or forms.
I think the private sector needs to reinvent itself. I think in an area of the region where you know, you have, of course, the government sector is overly relied on to solve some of the major challenges which we're faced with. The private sector needs to reinvent itself as a huge potential driver for, you know, dealing with some of the biggest social problems which we face. In partnerships with the government is critical and something which I don't think is happening enough in this part of the world.
Okay. We're going to go to the floor, open up. Fadi, you have a...
So I must apologize for actually commenting, but Maher mentioned it twice, so I have to respond. And I'm responding to Tom. We need to be very careful. Tom, you can't have adults without being pregnant, which means startups are so essential an ecosystem that allows you to invest in medium-sized companies. If you're not a baby, you won't be medium-sized and you won't be big. In fact, in the Arab world today, we have over-invested in private equity and have done very little in the startup space. We need to be very careful. If you look at the dollar amounts that has been invested in startups in the Arab world, it is practically a drop in the sea compared to what we have invested in privatization and private equity and turning companies around. So we cannot tell entrepreneurs today that we are focusing on startups. We just can't. So it's like telling them, if you have a dream and you have an idea, I don't want to invest in you because it's just we're overdoing it. No, we're not overdoing it. I think we are focusing on startups. We need to do much more. Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean that.
It's okay.
But that's the reality.
Look, I think it's just a question of focus. I think, you know, we can't just... The reality is, are those startups going to solve the problem that this region faces? Well, you need to start companies before you scale them, but the focus needs to be on scaling them, ultimately.
I think Osama got excited. Here, Tina. Okay. Can we get the mic to Osama? Because I think he got overly excited. He's going to get pissed at me now.
Hello? I am...
Do we have a microphone?
So in the meantime, maybe I can ask a question until we fix the mic. I want to ask a question to Abdullatif. You're from the Emirates, where it is... I mean, we can't deny the fact that there are safety nets provided to the people by the governments here. Are safety nets something that could push for winners, or are they bad for creating the next generation of winners, from your own experience?
Hello.
Check. Well, I think, of course, it's always good, you know. We are in a very stable business environment. I think the government, and we saw how the government basically stepped in during the crisis, gave that sort of security to all the business owners, especially SMEs. So I think this is something will always continue, and the UAE will be a great platform for SMEs to come and establish their businesses. And we started seeing probably a lot of businesses going from here. Just Falafel, it's probably is one great example. I see them almost every day during every event. As an Emirati, I feel so proud to see, you know, a brand from the UAE now opening in London and Tokyo and elsewhere in the world.
That's different. We're not talking about the economic situation in the Emirates. We're talking about the people themselves feeling it's okay for them to fail because they're going to catch caught up by the government. Is that something, I mean, do we think that entrepreneurs are hungry, or do we think that entrepreneurs...
Well, I'll tell you, if you talk to me as an Emirati,
yes.
Somehow I might be in an agreement with you, but I think we should not, seriously, we have a bigger responsibilities as Emiratis Although the government might step in, the government might always support us. We have various funding coming from the government. But that should never be a reason for us to basically start a business or win. As Emiratis, I think we have even bigger responsibilities toward our nation, toward our countries, toward even other nationalities. We need to start working harder. We start proving ourselves that, you know what, if we don't want to do it for our nation, it shouldn't only be driven financially, but should be driven through that this is something that I should do for my country. And I believe we have a complete new generation of Emiratis now who are basically thinking toward, you know, basically not counting on the government. I'll give you a small example here. We started our business 3 years back when almost every media company was shutting down. And I had opportunities from Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid establishment, Abdullatif, if you want financial funding, we are ready to give. I said, no. I said, we want to go and try to do it with our own money. And if we cannot do it, then it means we cannot go beyond the Emirates. Then it means how I'm going to survive in Saudi tomorrow, how I'm going to survive if I go to New York, to London, to Paris. If you have a big dream, then you start counting less on the government support, the government fund. Of course, there are a lot of laws, regulation, which can help you like every other country, but it shouldn't be beyond this.
Yeah. I think your compatriot has a comment.
Yes, as I really think it's a good moment to, as Alakh Abdullatif said, we need to start developing and exporting our ambassadors, our entrepreneurial ambassadors, our business heroes of the Arab world, within the UAE and elsewhere. You know, if you go to a high school kid in or student in the UAE, and you ask them to list 5 of their business heroes globally, they'll come up with names from Warren Buffett to Bill Gates to Steve Jobs, too many. You ask them to name 5 of their heroes in the cultural space, they'll name everyone from Brad Pitt to whoever you want. Do the vice versa. Go to a high school kid of the same age with access to the same opportunities, the same internet, and ask them in America to name the same from the Arab world. You'll struggle to find one. Some might know Fadi Ghandour, that's about it. But really, and so this is a huge opportunity. We need to develop, export our champions, and really they can be our most effective ambassadors. I think the cultural space and arts and culture, I know it's not relevant to this particular panel, but I think is again an area of opportunity which we're not embracing. We need to get those people out there, including our brands. Unfortunately, you walk in many of the streets of some of the biggest cities in the world, and you will struggle to find a successful global Arab brand. I mean, Dubai really has been a great example at being able to do that with a few names such as Emirates Airlines, which is known globally now, DP World, Jumeirah as a group, but few and far between, to be honest. What about our products, our consumer products? In the realm of technology, even in film, in music. So this is really a sector which I think we can do that. So I think our entrepreneurs need to start thinking globally. No longer should we be thinking within the realm of our borders. We need to start thinking globally, utilizing our products and services to really represent what the Arab world can mean to a global network. I think it's critical.
Well said on the role of role models. Farrukh, I think you want to comment maybe on the safety nets as well, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on your entrepreneurs and the background they come from in Pakistan as well.
On the safety nets?
The background of your entrepreneurs.
Right.
They're striving for changing or for
Certainly.
what moves them, basically.
Yeah. Sure. What I was also just wanted to add, what you were talking about failure earlier, and what Badr was just also mentioning. Culturally in Pakistan and perhaps in the region here as well, we have to accept failure as a necessary roadblock on the road to success. Whether it's Steve Jobs, he failed and he succeeded. People in culture. At Acumen, failure is taken very seriously, and it's really studying and learning from failure and what investments, which are in a very hard space, what happens when they go wrong, which is really part of why we succeed. And I think when you're in the startup space, you go into a startup, you have to be ready that there is a fair chance that you'll fail. But you have
More
to...
than fair, actually.
Sorry?
Higher than fair.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have to be able to pick up, and the ecosystem around you has to be able to accept that, to come and back you up again, as long as you've learned from that failure. And that's something, which is, of course, there in abundance in the US, in the Silicon Valley, but really is not even there in Europe. And that's something I think would be important to help see how we could evolve that here.
Yeah, thank you, Farrukh.
Okay, my name is David. I'm coming from Ghana. And Global Entrepreneur Summit is one of the most amazing things that, as a young, hungry entrepreneur, I've ever come across. I came across this entrepreneurship thing when I was in a business meeting in Cairo. And I said to myself, I will definitely be here at this event. And the first time I saw Abraaj Abraaj Group was on CNN. They were trying to do some fundraising from young entrepreneurs. And I said, one day, I'll also probably meet Abraaj Group and see what the fund can do for Africa. You're talking about global entrepreneurship. What is the people in the Emiratis and other companies interested? What are you doing to partner with African countries like Ghana? Ghana is basically setting the pace for democracy. We just had a presidential election, and it was free and fair, and we have a president. We have a proper presidential debate, and we have a president. Very, very, focus-driven country. Infrastructure is developing. So as an entrepreneur, when I come here, and I see these things, and I think it's really the way forward, and I really appreciate Abdullatif.
I think, Tom, you want to take this question?
Look, I think Africa's in a fantastic place at the moment. It's got 1 billion consumers, and I'm a bit boring like this, but I view demographics as a consumer-driven thing. 500 million of them have got mobile phones. Talk about technology. It's over mobile telephony and mobile development and innovation is going at such a pace in Africa. Forget the PC or any desktop device. It's completely jumped over that. So everything from banking to healthcare to education is all available on your handset. And I think that's a really important change. I mean, when we look, and we invest a lot in Africa and in Ghana, and we have a team of people there. But when you look globally at what is the tipping point that a country or a continent goes through when it breaks out? And it's normally you get a far-sighted leader that puts into place open market policies. You've got demographics on your side. You suddenly go through this tipping point, and the economy starts to take off, and Ghana's growing at over 6% per annum these days, actually, and it's because it's got this huge demographic trend. It's had pro-business policies, and that's what we need to adopt globally, obviously.
Thank you. So,
anyway, thank you very much. This is a very interesting summit.
So I think we have to close because I just got the signal. But before we close, I just want to go quickly over the panel. Have every one of you just give a few tips. You can decide which answer you want to answer. Either a few tips or just tell us, can winning be taught and how? You want to start with the mic?
Yeah, I just think my one piece of advice to a would-be entrepreneur would be to get a mentor, somebody who's been through it before, because it doesn't matter what age you can benefit from somebody else's experiences.
I mean, this would have been my answer, but the other one is get your story right. Get your story right. What you're gonna do with the money, your vision, how you're gonna get there. Get your story right.
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to ask, and you've got to really work hard. There's just no substitute for that. It is a startup is one of the most difficult things you'll ever do in your life.
Look, I think what's critical to everything and anything that we do, be it in the business world or others, is that it comes from a place of passion. And if you don't have that, you're not going to do it well. And so finding your passion is something critical. When you do that, and in parallel with doing that, it's really thinking of a stakeholder approach. And that comes with really compassion. The golden rule, do unto others as you want done unto yourself. When you're developing a product or a service, think how really it's going to affect not just your pocket, but all your stakeholders. And that's, I think, critical.
Well, I would say believe in yourself, trust your abilities, work in building more skills every day. Knowledge is available for everyone with the internet today. The world is yours. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. So believe in yourself, work hard, get a mentor, and get your story right. Thank you.